very good morning to you. It is the public. Actually, I always say good morning. just a thought. I always say good morning, and it might be your evening when you listen to this. I'm kind of curious, actually, when you do listen. Let me know if you would like to. Anyway, what I was going to talk about today is a bit of a quick special that I mentioned that I was going to do last week in the newsletter. And I was asked by another site, another podcast, actually, a publicity podcast, to do a little bit about becoming a good podcast guest or an interview guest. Now, as you may well know, I've interviewed many people over the years when I was a journalist on news radio in the United Kingdom for many years, where I presented a drive time news program. It was 2.5 hours of unscripted, or mostly unscripted, show 5 days a week. And so what I did was I wrote down sort of a couple of points I was going to share with this person's audience. And I ended up just going into a bit of a sort of ramble about a whole bunch of techniques. And I just thought that you might appreciate it too. So there's this quick special episode today of the Public Relations Podcast where I'm just going to run through some of the points that I made and just see if I can maybe give you some inspiration as well. So this is basically if you want to be on a podcast, or your client wants to be on a podcast, or your boss wants to be on a podcast, some of the things to think about. And also this stuff applies just as much to doing media interviews as well. The first step one of, I'm going to go through 7 steps here, is, and I don't know how many times I say this, but people don't do it, is to research the podcast thoroughly, or the interview or the show. You want to be listening to the episodes. Understand the type of show and its style by listening to at least 1 or 2 episodes. You just want to know the tone. I mean, is it a combative style of interview? Is it a friendly one? Are they warm? Are they talking about your industry, or are they appealing to a different market? All these things are going to influence how you talk. And while you might think that coming on as a guest, or your boss, or whoever it is going to go in and just simply say what they want to say, unless you gear it up to the audience, it's not just that the podcaster might be less interested, but their audience is going to be less interested. If you're trying to get across your core messages, you've got to research the outlet to find out what the tone is, and then match what you're going to deliver to that. Or otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. You've got to resonate with that audience. And I'm not talking about, sitting down and spending like 10 years researching something or whatever. I mean, literally, one of the advantages of media outlets compared to, I don't know, researching a new job is that it's all there. The podcasts are out there to listen to. Their websites are there to have a look at. So make sure you're identifying exactly what it is that they're looking for. Make sure you know what that criteria is. The other thing as well is it's a bit like with the Public Relations Podcast. I have a page which actually says what I'm looking for. And yet you can tell that people haven't even read that when they put forward a pitch to appear on this particular show. So once you know who they are, then tailor your pitch. I saw a few people mentioning on LinkedIn the other day that one of the standard pitches you get is the top line says, "I loved your recent episode on X, and I agree with you about Y," whatever. And then it goes into a generic pitch which shows that they've never listened to a podcast in their life. So what they've done is they've listened to literally probably, or they might have read the show description, or listened to the first few minutes of something. And you've got to show a bit more throughout your pitch. You can't just have a generic pitch which you put one top line onto. It's got to feel like you actually do listen to it. So when you talk about the guest, why is it relevant to that show? Mention the show. I mean, you think about even automatic email senders now. You don't have to be writing this all personally if you don't want to. You can be using inserted things. So, I mean, I think about like the MailerLite email platform, okay? And you can insert dynamic content, like a name. So you like say, "Hello, John," or whatever. But there's no reason why you can't create custom fields in MailerLite, and I'm sure in other email platforms as well, for things which might tailor more into the show. So it could be like a line like ... "as I know you like to take X style of guests." Now that could be a generic line for each different type. The point I'm making here is that you can tailor this stuff and you can automate it if you think it through. So know the host, know what style of questions they're going to ask. Are they going to ask deep, in-depth questions? They're going to ask open questions. They're going to ask closed questions and short, blunt questions, and know the format of the podcast or the interview before you go on. Research is point number 1. Actually, point number 2 was about the pitch. I've already gone into a big ramble about it. But the only other thing I would say is be genuine in your approach. Be relevant, but also be flexible as well. So don't just say, A lot of people as well will pitch to an outlet and say, I want to talk about this. Now, I know from being on the PR side, I know the reality is because the client or the boss is saying, I want to talk about this. And it's very easy to want to say that, just to at least be able to show that email to the boss or the client and say, look, we've been putting this forward. But outlets, even small podcasts or big podcasts or interviewers, don't care. And the more they feel that they're being used for free publicity, the more they're going to reject your pitch. So the more you can tailor that to sort of say, I know you've spoken about this before, you've spoken about this, so if you would prefer to go down that angle or whatever, then do let us know. Very happy to fit in with what you need for your show. Make it relevant to them. Another thing to put in the pitch actually is to highlight your unique value. Now, while there's a lot of shows out there who will basically just take any guest, anyone who, I call it the podcast circuit, where you just go and do a bunch of podcasts and you do exactly the same interview. But any good podcast, or particularly the bigger shows, are going to want to know why you're going to add something new or different. They don't want you to come on and do the same interview that you did in 10 other places. They want you to come on and do something new and exciting. So when you do a pitch, if you think about what you can offer them. So can you offer them some new research that you're going to be announcing today, or something that you've just discovered, or some quirk or some insight that you've got? I mean, if you think about your average day and what you're doing, I bet you're seeing new things every day. So what new little hook can you add to it? Even if you want to talk about something completely different, what new hook can you add to it to make that pitch a bit more exciting, a bit more relevant to that particular person, and make them think, oh, you know what, that sounds quite interesting. I wouldn't mind having that for my show. Particularly, as I say, the bigger shows, they want to have something that they can latch onto, that they can then use to promote the show. So ideally, if you're talking about something that's trending, but they want something that is going to be interesting to their audience and feel unique and feel like people have to tune into their episode for it. Talking about the tone and style, didn't I already? So there's not much more to say really beyond making sure that you're aware of how, is it serious? Is it humorous? Is it relaxed? Is it intense? But this is the point I was going to make, is that when you actually go on a podcast or an interview and you've done your research, you know what that presenter is going to be like. You want to go on there and match that style. So there is no point going on there, and you see this all the time, is you'll have a podcast or a show or whatever that has quite a sort of short slot, and that'll be like a 3-minute sort of slot. And they'll ask quite quick questions, and they want to go through sort of, 10 questions in 3 minutes type thing. And you'll get people going on there who just start droning on. And you obviously, if you're doing it deliberately because you're trying to make the interview run long so that they can't ask more questions because you're in a controversial topic or whatever like that, I understand that. But if you're going on there to try and get across information and to be invited back as someone that they want to speak to and all this, as a good guest that the audience like, you need to match that style. So is it fast paced? Is it serious? Is it humorous? I think the example that I gave one time was, and I still don't quite know why, but I was actually invited while I was talking about comms to go on a wrestling podcast in the United States. And I tuned into this podcast and I was listening away to it. And I just thought, nah, I can't do that. I can't twist what I talk about over to that audience, because it was I'm trying to be nice about this here because it's not my sort of show. It was a very laddish podcast. Let's put it that way. It was like a group of guys who were being very lad-like. And it's just, I really don't quite know why they reached out to me. But even, I guess I could have gone on there and I could have spoken about comms in the world of wrestling. Not that I know much about it, but it doesn't take a lot to sort of start analyzing an industry, does it, and start making observations. But I just thought, no, I just can't do it. I can't match me personally to that style. I'm just not that lad. I'm a bit older than that now, unfortunately. So it's about knowing the tone and style. Can you match it? Can you fit in with it? Are you going to go on there and be a really awkward guest, or are you going to be someone that is going to be someone that fits in with the show and the audience type? Be prepared to be spontaneous and adaptable. What I mean by this is a couple of things. I don't mean people messing you around with bookings and times. This happens a lot. Certainly on big shows. I'm sure if you've worked with big shows before, you'll have heard the term biffing, which basically means that they got a better guest on or they ran out of time and you're just like, no, sorry, you're not coming on. And with the bigger shows, they can do it because they know you're going to want to be coming back to it. So that's not really the point I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the need to be spontaneous in the moment of the interview. One of the biggest problems that people make when they do interviews as guests is they're going to autopilot. And what they've done is they've rehearsed it so much, they've rehearsed their stock lines that they don't listen to the question the interviewer has asked. And instead they just answer what they want to answer, but generally in a way that is so practiced that it doesn't sound like it's coming from the heart. Here's a quick trick I used to tell people when I was teaching people how to read on the radio. And it's this, is that when you have a script in front of you, a script, this was the phrase I used to use, a script is not a script, but a memory aid to help you tell a story. And this is really important, even if you haven't got a written script in front of you, and I haven't got a written script in front of me right now, is that when you say the words, you've got to feel them. So if I said, I'm trying to think of an example here. Let's say that one of my answers to an interview question was, the government doesn't agree with the policy of the opposition. Now, if I say that, the government doesn't agree with the policy of the opposition, chances are you're mentally switching off already because it's just boring, it's dull. Now, if I say, the government, we just do not agree with the opposition. So what am I doing now? I'm putting passion into it. I'm putting emotion into it. And what I'm doing is interpreting those core cold words. I'm putting emotion. I'm putting something into it to make it stand out. So what I'm saying is that when you go on and do that interview, is that, yeah, for sure, practice your lines. You've got to make sure that you're going to get across what you want. But be in the moment, be authentic, be natural, and respond to the interviewer's questions in an authentic way, through emotion. Feel those answers as you're actually saying it. Next one is to deliver value quickly and consistently. And what I mean by this is to get to the point as quickly as you can. I've always been impressed by John Lee Dumas, who does Entrepreneur on Fire. And he said one time that what he looks for from guests is what he describes as a value bomb. And what that means is that he wants the interviewer to give something of value as fast as possible as soon as the podcast starts. And I remember a long time ago listening to one of the episodes, and I think he went from me pressing play to the guest starting to speak to them starting to give value within 8 seconds. Now that's impressive because you're going to hook people in if you can do that. So it's just a technique to be aware of, is that don't waffle around who you are, what your organization does, blah, 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 blah. People don't care about that until you've given them some value. Instead, think about what is the thing you can give that is going to be most interesting or help them or stand out to them that you can give in as early as possible in your very first answer. So think about that. What is the value that you can give? And that hopefully will help you engage with the audience and get them excited and keep listening to you. And then they're going to be interested in finding out who you are. A few common pitfalls I thought of. Try to avoid using cliches. It's very easy to do sometimes, but the problem is that when people from certain industries are interviewed, they often tend to give the same answers. And this comes back to this whole point about uniqueness and about value, is that you've got to make sure that you're differentiating yourself. Whether that be because you have an opinion or a different perspective or something like that. But you've got to get that across, and you've got to make people realize so that you're not just seen as yet another person who does this. So think about what you deliver differently and get that in there. Don't just use cliches of your industry because, you're just going to lose the audience. And finally, just think again about what the show values. Why do people listen to that show? What do they want to get from it? Now, when I talk about value, it's important to remember that I'm not just talking about education. I'm also talking about entertainment or inspiration or thought-provoking or whatever it is. People listen to content because there's some sort of value to them. It could make them smile. It could make them educated or whatever it is. Some sort of value to them. So what is that value that people listen to this show for? Be absolutely clear on that and then match what you're going to do to giving that value as part of what you're putting across. So there we go. There's 7 items there, which I've kind of rambled around. I hope that's useful. I mean, I'm sure I will cover these again in the Public Relations podcast in more detail and when I'm speaking to guests as well. But I hope they're useful. If you have any questions on them, then of course, feel free to reach out to me. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn at Richard Midson. That's Midson, Richard Midson, Midson, or via the publicrelationspodcast.com. Don't think there's much else to say for today. I'll be back with PR Bites tomorrow, but I hope that's useful. And by the way, if you are doing any interviews, and I'm sure you're going to be doing media training with people, but if you have any particular questions about it or any particular thoughts or on particular outlets you're trying to approach, you're not quite sure what angles to go down or whatever, then feel free to ping me a line. If I've got time, I will try and have a quick listen to whoever it is and give you some thoughts on my perspective on what a line I would go down or what angle I would go down to try and tackle that interview. Yeah, as I say, you can reach me on LinkedIn. As usual, feel free to connect. That's it for now. Have a lovely rest of your day. I will speak to you tomorrow in PR Bites. Have a good one. Bye.